Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. I'm Amy, and this week I did my second ever canning adventure, which was canning carrots with my digital canner. I started by filling my canner with water to the fill line as outlined in the manual. I also filled the clean pint jars I'm using halfway with water and added them into the canner pot. I locked the lid, and you can see I figured out the removal of the regulator. It actually just pops right off. I hit the button and then programmed the time for pints of carrots. The canner will heat up the jars for me, so now I can move on to prepping the carrots. Since I am still a very new gardener, I don't actually have any homegrown carrots yet. I do have some growing in the garden right now, but they are not ready yet. But you can home can vegetables from the store just as easy as you can from the garden. So here is my first 5-pound bag of carrots. I did end up canning around 12 to 13 pounds, but I did them in batches. I canned most of the pints and a few quarts to use for larger meals. I started by peeling all the carrots. I haven't washed them yet since I'll be washing them thoroughly after I get them all peeled. And all of these carrot peels are going into my compost bucket, so they will not go to waste. After peeling and washing, now it was time to chop them up. And let me tell you, my hands were so tired after this. By the last few carrots, my hands were actually starting to shake a little, which is crazy. I cut them up to roughly even-sized little medallions. And then some of them I had to cut them in half if the diameter of the carrot was a little big, since I want these to cook evenly during the canning process. When the canner beeped at me, I removed the lid and began pulling out the cans. I dumped the water, and now it is time to fill up some carrots. I am using the raw pack method for these, so I didn't need to cook the carrots at all. I added carrots to the jar and left 1 inch of headspace. I was being a little particular since this is only the second time I've ever canned anything, and I was adding or picking out a piece of carrot if it looked too high or too low. I just wasn't sure, so. I did add a half teaspoon of canning salt and then poured in hot water from the pot I put on to boil earlier, again leaving 1 inch of headspace. Next, I used a chopstick to debubble, and then I wiped off the rim of the jar with a clean towel to make sure there was no salt or anything on the rim, since I want these jars to have a good seal. I'm still getting comfortable with the tightness, and I almost tightened this one too much again, but I got it right the second time. Then I did the same with the rest of the jars, but I did them as a group to move the process along a little bit. When I got all the cans filled up, I got everything back in the canner, locked up the lid, and hit the button to start the canning. The Presto will heat up again and come to pressure before it starts counting down the 25-minute canning time, so I just let it do its thing. All in all, it took about 2 hours for the canning and the cooling processes. When the canning, and just as importantly the cooling cycle, were finished, I gave the canner another 15 minutes after the pressure gauge dropped. Then I removed the lid and saw some beautiful canned carrots. Last week when I was canning potatoes, I was impatient at the end and had some siphoning, so my goal this week was to minimize that. And I am happy to report that the carrots did not siphon at all when I opened the lid or when I picked them up. These are beautiful, and every single jar sealed from all 3 batches. How cool is canning? The next thing I did this week was to make some homemade coffee creamers. I love flavored coffees, but I really don't love the ingredients in many store-bought creamers or the price tags of the cleaner ones. So I am making my own so I can control exactly what goes into them. I started with pumpkin spice. I know, it's summer, and pumpkin spice is very much an autumn thing, but you know, I don't even care if it's 100 degrees outside. I love some pumpkin spice at any time of the year. So this is the most complicated of the 3 creamers I made, and I deliberately left this portion of the video unedited with no cuts or changes in speed or anything, so you can see just how quickly this comes together. To a bowl, I added 1 can of sweetened condensed milk, and the ingredients on this can are sugar and milk with no additional additives whatsoever. I then added 1 3/4 cups of half and half and 3 tablespoons of pumpkin puree. You don't want pumpkin pie filling with all the seasonings in it, you just want the basic puree. I was randomly stirring this for just a little bit for some reason, but you don't actually have to stir anything up until all the ingredients are in the bowl. You do end up with most of a can of pumpkin puree left over, but pumpkin puree stores really well in the freezer. Just scrape it all into a freezer bag, get as much air out as possible, and you can store it for 3 to 6 months. You could also scoop this out into 3 tablespoon scoop amounts and freeze that on a tray, then put the measured out scoops in a bag once they're frozen and toss them back into the freezer. Next time you make this creamer, just grab a scoop and let it thaw out. Then I added 2 tablespoons of maple syrup just to add that lovely mapley undertone. And then come the warm spices. I added 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, and 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves. Lastly, I added 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and that is it. And then just stir this up really well to make sure the condensed milk and the pumpkin puree are well incorporated. It'll also take a moment to get those spices to stop floating around on top and incorporate into the liquid ingredients. But when everything looks nicely mixed, you just pour this into a bottle and store it in the fridge. It'll store for about a week, or as long as the half and half stays good, which for me is about a week. From the timestamps, I started this at 5 minutes, 18 seconds, and I was finished at 9 minutes and 45 seconds. So this creamer took less than 5 minutes to throw together. It has simple ingredients and comes together in just minutes, and this is so tasty. I really hope you give this one a try. For the next recipe, we're having a little bit of boozy fun. This is Bailey's Irish Creamer. It only has 3 simple ingredients. To start, I added 1 can of sweetened condensed milk and 1 3/4 cups of half and half to a small saucepan. I made sure to scrape that condensed milk out as best I could because that is some sticky stuff. You'll want to mix this up really well so the condensed milk is incorporated. I always use a whisk for creamers. I've found they do a better job breaking up the sticky condensed milk and cutting it into the half and half. And when I tried using a spoon or a spatula, the condensed milk just wanted to stick to it and it took longer to mix it all up. Then keep it over medium to low heat and warm this up until it's nice and hot, stirring pretty often so the milk doesn't start to stick and you really don't want it to scorch. You don't want to boil this either, just get it nice and steamy. I just hang close by and watch this pretty closely so I don't burn it, since accidentally boiling it could separate the milk and we really do not want that. I don't know what sweet curdled milk would taste or smell like, and I'm not really sure I want to. Lastly, I pulled it off the heat and added a 1/4 cup of Bailey's Irish cream. Gave everything a good stir and sat this to the side to cool completely before pouring it into a bottle. You could add more Bailey's if you wanted to make this stronger, but even just that 1/4 cup gives this a nice sweet Irish cream flavor with a hint of that telltale bite. We love to add this to an evening coffee or maybe on a nice lazy weekend morning. It is just decadent creamer. The final creamer is a little twist on a caramel creamer, and this is my personal favorite. I started with 1 cup of packed brown sugar and added a 1/2 cup of water. Now this does need to come to a boil over medium heat, and then it needs to boil for about 5 to 7 minutes or until the mixture starts to darken and begins to be more of a syrup. You'll want to stir this often as well to prevent sticking or scorching, because scorched sugar does not smell good. Here is a little progression as the mixture boils down and darkens into a nice caramel-like syrup. When I got the mixture boiled down to what looks like a loose syrup, I pulled it from the heat and let it sit for a few minutes to let that syrup cool just a little bit. I then slowly added 1 3/4 cups of half and half while stirring constantly. This recipe calls for 1 cup heavy cream and 3/4 cup milk, but I happen to have half and half on hand and it worked great. Next was 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and a pinch of salt. And then I just stirred everything up until it was nicely combined and set this to the side to cool as well. It did take about a half hour for the Baileys and the caramel to cool down enough for the glass jars, but the actual work time for these was only about 10 to 12 minutes each, and you could easily make them at the same time. And here we have them, 3 fabulous, luxurious coffee creamers that are simple, very, very easy, and so tasty. I have developed a habit of accidentally putting too much in my coffee just because they taste awesome. And here's a last minute tip. You can make a very, very simple sweet cream coffee creamer by whisking together 1 cup of sweetened condensed milk and 2 cups of half and half, which comes together in seconds. I really hope you try these because these are just so fantastic. Last, but definitely not least, we are making dinner. Pork chops in a creamy mushroom sauce, and this is so rich and tastes just marvelous. First things first, I preheated the oven to 375 Fahrenheit. Then I took 4 pork chops, and you can see these are thin, but you could use thick cut ones as well. It would still work. I salted and peppered both sides of the pork, and I was pretty generous since this was the only salt and pepper in the dish, although you could probably add as much as you want later on. In a large pan over medium-high heat, I added a tablespoon of butter and let that melt down. When it was melted, I added about a tablespoon of olive oil and mixed those together. The oil will prevent the butter from burning. When the oil and butter are nice and bubbly, add in the pork and sear these chops. You don't want to cook the pork the whole way through, just get a nice crust on each side. I had to brown my pork chops in 2 batches since they were just a little big for the pan at first, and you don't want to crowd them when they're browning. You can see the pork chops get these beautiful crispy seared edges, which gives these chops such great flavor. When the pork chops were nice and brown, I set them to the side and added 2 more tablespoons of butter to the pan. I let this butter melt down, which only took a few seconds since the pan was already really hot. I actually did turn the burner down just a little to medium instead of medium-high. Then, I added in 1 cup of mushrooms and 1 tablespoon of minced garlic. I am using canned mushrooms here because I didn't actually have any fresh mushrooms on hand that night, but the canned mushrooms worked great, so you can use either. You'll want to stir this often and saute until the mushrooms start to brown. You can see all that nice dark fond on the bottom of the pan from the pork. When the mushrooms are nice and brown, pour in 1 cup of chicken broth or stock and stir everything all up. The broth will deglaze the pan, and you'll want to make sure to scrape up all that ultra flavorful fond off the bottom so that flavor gets into the sauce. Next, I added 1 cup of heavy cream, and you'll want to pour this nice and slowly and stir while you pour so the cream doesn't curdle since this is pretty hot. Then add 3 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese. When everything is nice and combined, you add the pork back into the pan. I also made sure to add any juice that's on the plate since that will also have some good flavor. Spoon the sauce over top of the pork chops to keep them from drying out and turn off the burner. This pan will now go into the oven, uncovered, and bake for 20 to 25 minutes. About 2 or 3 times during the baking, you'll want to spoon the sauce over the chops again so they stay nice and juicy. When they're done, spoon the sauce over them one last time, and these pork chops are ready to serve. This sauce is so flavorful and the pork is so juicy and tender. We serve these with steamed broccoli and baked potatoes, and this dinner is going to happen a lot in this house. It was so good. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me this week. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment if you like. Have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back next Sunday. Bye.